have had a very varied path since then. And so I think if there are folks who are like, yeah, Will's a computer science major, he's got his whole path in front of him, but like I'm an English major, what am I going to do? Just know that it tends to work out over time, especially if you follow some of the advice that I'll share today. Um, so I've been a teacher. I actually got my teaching certificate through Swarthmore. I've worked in the nonprofit sector, so like Teach for America, social venture capital in New York City, and then ultimately got into tech at Apple, at LinkedIn, at Google, a bunch of startups like Udacity, now Khan Academy. And so I think all that goes to show that you're never going to have a linear career path, no matter what you expect. And so you should embrace the chaos a little bit, try different things, especially at this stage in your career. There's so much pressure, maybe from parents or from others about like, hey, do you have your internship? Do you have your plans together? Don't sweat that stuff. Like you're going to have lots and lots of times to explore lots of awesome opportunities, and just know that it does tend to work out in the long run. So that's what I want to start with.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to hear more about like, because yeah, you've done so much from like being a teacher to like, working in marketing. Like how do you think about like career exploration and how do you like go about like, figuring out like, oh, what is a good fit for me?
Yeah. So there's this sort of like very rationalistic approach, and then there's the sort of realistic approach. And the rationalistic one is like, it's crazy to me that so many Swatis have graduated since I did. And I think you are probably the first Swati to ever reach out to me and say, hey, what is it like to work in tech or work at Google or work at wherever? And I think that's just the no-brainer approach, even though a lot of Swatis aren't trained in it, which is don't just sort of hope for the best and cross your fingers. Go talk to someone who's doing the job, ideally someone who has been in your shoes at one point. And so I can promise you, I've met so many Swatis across Silicon Valley. So if you want to be an engineer, a PM, anything in between, there are Swatis who are doing that exact job right now and would love to chat with you because they're probably not getting a lot of outreach either. So that's the rationalistic approach. The more sort of like realistic one, I think, is no matter how much outreach you do, you're always going to have that FOMO effect of like, hey, that job seems really sexy or that company seems really glamorous. I got to try it out. And you may even hear bad things about that company or that job, but you're still going to want to do it because you have to scratch that itch. And so, as someone who's like now at the stage in his life where I know I probably like seem like, totally this old guy compared to you, know that like when I was 21, when I was 25, those were the moments when you could really experiment without worrying about like kids and family and all these obligations that tie you down. So if you're like, well, I've done my networking, I've talked to some SWAT alums, but I still got to give this a shot, just give it a shot. Like every single career move I've ever made has been built on the foundation of the stuff that I've done before. And frankly, the mistakes I've made. Like discovering, for instance, that I didn't love living working for a big tech company brought me to Khan Academy, where I am really happy. And so in some cases, you just have to make the mistakes, but I would say make them earlier rather than later in your career.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's really good advice. Yeah. At least for me right now during my gap year, I've been trying a lot of different things. I found that was really helpful for me.
Nice.
Um, can you tell us a bit more about like what the day to day looks like as a product marketing manager? Because that's not something we hear a lot about at SWAT.
Yeah, totally. I will say, like, it's a fascinating phenomenon that people tend to be very focused on software engineering, which makes sense if you're CS, or product management if you're CS or pretty much anything else, because there are actually more product marketers in tech I've encountered than even product managers. It just tends to be a job like every tech firm has. And the reality is that it's not that different than product management. But the nice thing about it is that it comes with a much lower barrier to entry. So you may have heard if you want to be a product manager, you have to have a CS degree. Maybe it helps to get a master's degree. Maybe you have to go to some place like Stanford to really have the best possible shot. Whereas product marketers like myself have an education or poli sci background like I do, or they have humanities, English, dance, art history, whatever. Just because the real sort of like experience of being a product marketer is fundamentally about integrating sort of the liberal arts and technology. I don't know if you've ever seen like pictures of these old Steve Jobs keynotes, but he actually had like literally the signpost where it was like liberal arts meets technology. That's where Apple plays. And I think that's what product marketing is all about. Because on the one hand, you have to understand the actual customer, the human being. So if you're selling iPhones, who's buying iPhones? What do they like? What do they care about? Understanding them really deeply. But at the same time, you got to be able to go back to the product managers and the engineers and translate those into the technical realm. So what does it take to ultimately make this customer happy when it comes down to features and needs and pain points and things like that? So it's really kind of this interesting intersectional role in a way, because everything that you're learning in your humanities and social sciences classes is important, but so are some of the more technological aspects of your education.
Can you give us some examples of like projects that you've worked on, or like what are some, I guess, yeah, like because you mentioned like talk like being closer to the users. Like, do you interview users? Like how do you think about product positioning and like go to market and all that stuff? I'd love to hear more
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Let me give you a really good example from my LinkedIn days, because you would actually be the target audience for this. So when I was working at LinkedIn about 10 years ago, they had a big problem, which is they had just gone public, but they actually were really worried about their future, because all of a sudden there was this drumbeat, this is a long time ago, of like Facebook was going to get in the career space and Facebook was going to have a jobs board. And of course, Facebook was super hot then. And so the fear was that Facebook was going to eat LinkedIn's lunch, especially with younger folks, not like CEOs and the kind of folks who typically use LinkedIn back in the day. And so essentially, I went out to college students just like yourselves, and I was like, what do you think about LinkedIn? So focus groups, user interviews, surveys, and the results were not good. It was like LinkedIn is like Facebook for old people. And this is before Facebook was for old people, mind you, but you get the idea. They said things like, if I met all the different social media platforms at a bar, Facebook would be like the guy who has all the friends. Twitter's like the guy who just can't stop talking. LinkedIn is like the sad guy sitting by himself drinking Chardonnay, which told me like everything I needed to know about like the student perception of LinkedIn. And so then I took that insight back to our product team and said, hey, here's what the sort of zeitgeist of the student world is around networking, social media, jobs. Right now, we're basically dead on arrival. And so that was actually the impetus for building our very first education focused tools that help students say, who are all the Swarthmore alumni on LinkedIn? What are they doing? Who majored in the same thing I majored in? And how can I find them and follow in their footsteps? And that was a huge turning point, to the point that I assume you all probably have LinkedIn profiles at this day and age, because LinkedIn actually invested in that audience for the first time. So again, going out into the real world, understanding real human needs, and then translating it back into the world of technology.
I see. So I guess I'm a little confused because I know that like product managers also kind of play that similar role. So how is there a distinction like when you're working, or is it kind of the lines are blurred at that point? Like just
Yeah.
and whoever talks gets the feedback and implements it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking this question. So basically, it definitely varies company to company. My experience is that most product managers want to do that kind of research, but just don't have the time. I think, as with everything, just like at Swarthmore, where you're always focused on what's due tomorrow versus what's a month away, product managers have a lot of fires to put out internally in terms of, this engineer is falling behind. We didn't get the resourcing we needed to get this built. We're 3 weeks behind our deadline. And so they're very internally focused, probably more than they want to be. Whereas product marketers, just by virtue of always being in market, so to speak, sending out emails, being on social, going to events, it's just easier for them to gather that information and bring it back. So you're right, it's definitely a collaborative aspect, but it's something where like product marketers probably have more capacity for that than your average PM.
Got it. That makes sense. And like you yourself had a very, unusual path into product marketing. Like, is there a typical career path into product marketing? Yeah, what have you seen?
Yeah, so I'll give you the traditional path and then the path that I would actually recommend that you take if you're interested. So the traditional path is the same path for product management and a lot of jobs, frankly, like consulting, banking, which is graduate from Swarthmore, do whatever you want for a couple of years, then go get an MBA, then you're really sort of like the prime candidate. And that's what I did, and it certainly worked out. But what I discovered once I got inside tech was there are all these people who had saved $100,000 plus, as well as 2 years of their life, by just getting their way internally. And usually what it meant is there are so many ways to break into a tech company, even as a brand new grad, even if you're not a CS major. So things like customer success or sales and business development, where like they just need people who are hungry and ambitious to come in and do the job. And typically through roles like that, you're getting to learn the customers and you're also getting to meet all the internal stakeholders. So now when there's a product marketing opening and they say, we need someone who understands our customers inside and out and can work really well cross-functionally with our PMs and our engineers, guess who the perfect candidate is? Not the MBA anymore, who has none of that knowledge, but the insider who's already there and built the relationships. So that's the way to break in, even if you're not on a tech path.
Definitely, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, kind of like doing the role without the title, essentially, right? A little bit, and
Yeah,
then
and so
kind of
you can
yeah,
definitely, do a little bit of externally. So like, for example, right now you guys are funding entrepreneurs on campus and supporting them. You can be your own product marketer for your own project, right? If you're
yeah,
trying to launch a brand new product, You got to know your audience. You got to do your market research. You got to do your first couple campaigns, and that could become your portfolio. Or you can do it on the company's dime, where you started in these lower level positions, and then you build that connectivity just through getting to know folks inside.
I see, I see. I kind of want to pivot to like kind of like figuring out what types of companies someone might enjoy working for, because you mentioned that you didn't quite like big tech, and so that's why you went to Khan Academy. But you've also worked at a lot of different tech companies. So,
Yeah.
how might you describe like the different company cultures that you've worked for, and how does one go about figuring out what's a good fit for them?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking this question because honestly, even MBAs typically are not asking it 10 years later, and they're still making the same mistakes as a result, which is that no matter, again, how sexy the company is or how many stock options they throw at you, if you hate the job, if you hate the people you're working with, you're not going to have long term success. And so, again, you can do your research, you can talk to folks, you can read Glassdoor reviews. But I do think that, like, if we look at it from a strategic perspective, a lot of a company's culture is actually not necessarily built internally, but thrust upon it by its market. And so, if you think about the audiences of the companies that I've worked for, you can kind of get a sense of why they are the way they are. So, take a company like Apple, which is fairly cutthroat, fairly intense based on my experience. I don't think it's because Steve Jobs said, I want to have a cutthroat, intense culture. I think it's because the markets they played in, whether it was computers or phones or tablets, there's really these intense, very fickle marketplaces where the hot phone of yesterday is completely obsolete a year from now. And so if you're not constantly innovating, constantly pushing the envelope, you're going to fall behind in that B2C marketplace. Whereas a B2B company, which is what LinkedIn really is, and I should explain, by the way, B2C is business to consumer, so very consumer focused, and B2B is business to business, so selling to other businesses. You might say, oh, LinkedIn is a consumer business because I'm using it as a consumer. But really, as the famous saying goes, you're not the customer, you're the data, you're the product. They're just selling your information to recruiters and salespeople and marketers at other companies. And so the nice thing about a B2B business is that it just tends to be a much longer sales cycle with a lot more loyalty. So for example, if you're a recruiter and your company's been buying LinkedIn's, 100,000 or $1 million a year recruiter platform for 5 or 10 years, guess what? You're not going to change on a dime. You're going to stick with them even after the product gets a little old, gets a little sort of obsolete, just because of inertia, because that's how corporations work. And what that translates into is a much more relaxed working environment inside LinkedIn, because there's not that same drumbeat of, oh my goodness, we're going to fall behind Samsung or another hot company if we rest for even one day. And again, there's no such thing as like the right company or the wrong company, so much as the right company for you. You might say, hey, I'm super type A, I'm driven, I want to be in a place like Apple. Or you might say, you know what, I've got other priorities, I want to have a more balanced lifestyle, maybe a LinkedIn is for me. But I do think one nice way to figure it out is just think about who are their stakeholders, what are they responsible for, because that tends to drive the internal experience.
Yeah, that's actually that's a really good answer. Like I have never heard, like I haven't seen it from that perspective before. Like considering the customer base of the company. Can you talk a bit more about like comparing big tech versus like a startup or like smaller company like Khan Academy?
Yeah, for sure. So I do think that, again, we tend to focus more on those labels of like size than the label of like, what is the marketplace? What is the ecosystem dynamic that you're in? And I would say that in general, size can be really sort of illusory because LinkedIn and Apple were actually fairly the same size in terms of the employee base once you ruled out Apple retail employees, but had very different cultures. That being said, I do think that like if you're thinking about what you want to get out of the job, one big piece, especially at your stage in your career, is all about learning, right? And some people learn in very different ways, and you've got to figure out which way of learning is the best for you. So, for example, if you said, what I love most about Swarthmore is when I get a chance to basically figure it out on my own, maybe I hack around in the lab and I come up with the solution basically, totally autonomously. If you love that kind of hands-on learning, you're going to love a startup because they're going to throw you into the deep end. They're going to say, John, Will, we need you to have a marketing campaign executed in the next 4 weeks, but none of us are marketers. You figure it out, right? Versus if you're like, no, 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 I love the way the Swarthmore, teaches math or physics, where they start with the foundations and they give you the solid platform to build on, and everything is sort of linear built out. Then in that case, maybe a bigger company is better because there will be more formal training, more boot camps, more onboarding, more mentorship, where you have that person to guide you into this new world. And so again, it just comes back to what's right for you. No perfect fit for everyone.
Got it. That makes sense. Um, what do you think, or what are the most valuable skills for product marketers to have, and how can someone
Yeah.
begin develop someone like how can you develop those skills? Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the nice thing for you all is that the same skills that make me successful as a product marketer are the exact things that I experienced at Swarthmore. So again, whether you're a CS major or not, like I promise you, you are actually learning the things that are going to make you successful in the real world, so to speak, very soon. And those are threefold for product marketing. So number one, it all starts with empathy. Steve Jobs had this famous idea of like, we're not going to do focus groups at Apple. We're not going to do a bunch of BS market research. We're just going to build products that people love. And while there might be a little bit of sort of a showmanship to that kind of statement, it is true. I think Steve Jobs, for all of his problems, did have incredible empathy for other people in as much as he knew what they wanted. He knew they lusted after things that just worked, that felt new and novel and magical. And so that was sort of the way that he built out his roadmap. And so I think if you, as a Swati, can think about how do I get exposure outside the ivory tower, whether it's through teaching in the classroom like I did, or doing your own business where you're talking to potential customers all day or whatever, like can you build that empathy superpower that lies within you? That's the foundation for great product marketing, probably all great tech work in general. Number two, for product marketing in particular, it's about communicating key sort of selling points or key insights based on what you're gathering from your empathy. So, for example, if Steve Jobs said, "Hey, I have this amazing idea for the iPhone, but let me tell you about all the tech specs about this great, quad core processor and the amount of RAM and blah blah blah," the iPhone would never have gotten off the launch pad, right? No one would have been interested. But instead, he told this beautiful story that spoke to this moment when everyone had three different gadgets in their pocket, a phone and a Palm Pilot and all this other nonsense, and how it's coming together in this one beautiful experience. And so if you figure out how to communicate, whether it's through the papers you write or the presentations you put together or the way you reach out to your community, that's going to be really powerful for you as a product marketer. And then finally, there's this analytics piece, which is okay, you've figured out what your customer wants. You've communicated it really effectively, but how do you know it's working? And so I think the skill to really build in the next couple of years is understanding data and then funneling that back into the virtuous cycle where the data informs your empathy, the data informs your insights, the data informs your communication because you have a really clear pulse on what's happening out in the marketplace. So I think if you can nail those three skills, empathy, communication, and then ultimately analytics, you're going to be golden as a product marketer.
How do you approach like um analyzing like the data that you're given? Like are you like beholden to the data, or do you trust kind of like your intuition? Because I know like some, like for example, like growth marketers are very like really into the data all the time, but like I feel like some other marketers are more like, oh, okay, like the data is telling me one thing, but I feel some other way. Has there been situations where you've experienced that?
Absolutely. And I'll come back to that duality of like tech and the liberal arts, which is all the best product marketing and product management is the sort of crossroads of quantitative and qualitative data. So yeah, any smart techie these days is going to have access to tons of data sets. They're mining it for insights. They're looking for trends and patterns. But the problem with just focusing on quantitative data is what people will call like sort of the challenge of the local maxima, which is you say, hey, I am zeroed in as a Google product marketer on what color the Google search button should be. And so you've done tons of A/B testing, tons of research, and you figured out that by changing it to a blue button instead of a green button, you got 3% more clicks, and that's awesome. But what if what people wanted was not just to do more Google searches, but to have Google manage their email, AKA Gmail, right? Instead of just increasing a small percentage, you've actually had your ear to the ground and discovered a much bigger opportunity that was hiding in plain sight, but would never have appeared in your data set, right? And so that's why you always want to marry those two data sets together. What are you hearing through your data visualization platform, dashboards, but also what are you hearing through user experience research? What are you hearing through focus groups that can ultimately add color and context to the data itself?
Got it. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Jeremy, sorry, if I could just cut in here real
Yeah,
quick.
please do.
What did you call that again? The problem of
Local maxima. So like
maxima.
basically, I think it actually may be an engineering thing if I'm recalling correctly, but essentially like you are so zoomed in on one little part of the map and you're like, hey, that's the highest hill. That's the one we should focus on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
missed the fact that there's a giant mountain next door because you were so sort of micro instead of being macro.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I kind of want to transition to more general like career advice. And I know that like you have your I read your like tech blog, like Break into Tech, which is really really good. And I was just wondering if do you have any like advice for students who are confused about networking and like don't really know how to approach it?
Yeah, yeah. I thought about this a lot because basically one of my big regrets as a Swati was that I learned a lot about learning. I learned a lot about myself, which is awesome, but I didn't really learn a lot about how the world outside of Swarthmore works, or at least as much as I wish I had. And so I think when you all think about what are the skills you can build in the next couple of years, yeah, you want to build self-knowledge and you want to build functional skills, but you also just want to frankly build job search skills. And it's a muscle that too few folks come into the career world with, but just understanding how does someone get hired? What's that process looks like? And then how can I reverse engineer it to be successful? And so I would say, if you can spend a little bit of time putting yourself in the shoes of a recruiter or a hiring manager, imagining, hey, there are all these awesome grads from schools around the world competing for my jobs. How do I choose who to pick? Then some of these questions around networking or how to sort of apply yourself will ultimately start to unfold. So like with networking in particular, let me call out sort of two ideas, which is a lot of times, if you hear the word networking and you're an introvert like myself, your brain immediately seizes up because you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to like put on a fancy suit that I don't even own. I'm going to have to go to some networking event, have business cards. I'm just getting them printed up. It's going to be a disaster. And that's not at all what I'm talking about. Instead, to me, networking should always be goal driven. In the same way that you have a goal of landing an awesome job or starting an amazing organization, networking should be about what do you want to achieve here? And I think there are two main goals that I would think about when it comes to networking. The first is just learning. Like, again, if you want to figure out what it takes to get a job at Google or how you start your first company or how you raise VC, who better to find out from than the people who've done it and are doing it today? And that's where networking can help you. The same thing is true for earning. If you say, you know what, I'm ready to earn my first job, I'm ready to earn a pay raise or a promotion or my next job, like people can help you with that through things like referrals, getting your foot in the door at companies. And if you're really targeted and say, I got to find the right person, I've got to reach out the right way, I've got to say the right things to engage them in a really sort of ongoing conversation, then you can absolutely hit those goals. But you do have to know why you're doing it versus, hey, someone in the Career Center told me I had to. And
Definitely, yeah, being
actually,
very, yeah.
if you're open to it, Sean, I had
Yeah.
pulled up LinkedIn over here because I would love to give you guys a little demo. I
Oh,
do
for
feel like this is
sure.
something that so I wish someone had shown me at Swarthmore had LinkedIn and existed at the time. So are
For
you all
sure,
good
for
with that?
sure. Yeah, let's do it. Let me
Okay.
yeah, give the
And
sharing permissions. Okay, you should be able to
yeah,
share now.
and let me know if there's someone who's willing to be a brave volunteer because I would love to sort of put this in the context of someone who's maybe at a career crossroads. Like, do I go after PMM or PM? Do I go after engineering or data science? So if there's someone on the line who's like, hey, I'm curious to see how this works, would love to have a volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
Okay,
No,
great, great.
yeah.
See, that's the power of being the organizer. That's why it's great to run the club.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. Hold on one second.
Okay.
And I'm going to pull up LinkedIn. And here we go. Okay, so let me know if you're seeing my screen right now.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so Sean, talk to me a little bit about the kinds of paths you're considering either for internships or even for full-time work.
Yeah, so I think right now, post grad, I'm probably gonna either do product marketing or consulting. I think that's like two paths that I'm thinking of at the moment. I know that Google has like APM, like an APMM program,
Yeah,
which my cousin did, which I'm interested in. So yeah, that's kind of main thoughts at the moment. Yeah.
that's awesome. And so what if I were to tell you product marketing seems super sexy? And I get it. I've definitely been seduced by its siren song. But if I looked at my crystal ball 5 years from now, you are so miserable. You're like, this is product marketing. This is Google. Jeremy lied to me. I wish I had totally chosen consulting.
Yeah, yeah.
If I looked at my crystal ball and saw that, and I said, Sean, will you pay me $100 today to avoid that fate and find a career that I love and that makes me happy every day? Would it be worth it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to skip the $100. I'm going to give it to you for free right now. Okay.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
this is exactly what you want to do. And this may be actually how you found me. So you probably know this already. But I think it might be informative for everybody else on the line. So what I would say is, instead of just sort of like thinking, let me read a lot of blog posts, let me read Jeremy's blog because Jeremy makes product marketing seem amazing. Let me actually talk to folks on the inside and ask some hard questions. And again, if that's totally intimidating, and I get it, because like when I was 20, the idea of talking to a 40-year-old would have totally freaked me out. The easiest possible person you can go to is a recent SWAT grad. Someone who's been in your shoes, is not going to feel super intimidating. So always start with that low-hanging fruit. This is actually the product that I was alluding to before in terms of the first tool for students on LinkedIn. And it was called the Alumni Tool. It's basically a list of all these SWAT alumni and what they do today. And I promise you, not even the Swarthmore Alumni Department has this much data on alumni. I know because they've asked us for it at LinkedIn, but we're not willing to give it up. But it's accessible to you all right now. Let me go ahead and put this in the chat. And this is a very interactive one, by the way. If anyone wants to follow along on their own screens with their own interests, go for it. Okay, so let's start with this idea of who of these 15,000 alumni is in product marketing. And just like with a Google search, we're putting it in quotes. And voila, 200 plus alumni happen to be in that field. And are there any companies that you see here, Sean, that kind of that pique your interest? So maybe Google, for instance.
Yeah, let's just do Google.
Google, yeah, why not? Maybe some APMM grads there. And for those who don't know, Google and a lot of the biggest tech companies actually run kind of like onboarding programs, if you will, for brand new grads who want to get into product marketing or product management. And they're often under the label of APM or APMM rotational programs. So let's go see who these folks are. So some of these folks are actually more on the product management side. Let me just find someone maybe who's a little more product marketing focused. I'm guessing that they have some product marketing on their backgrounds. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. I'm just going to choose a couple more just to give us the most possible options. Okay. And then come back to our list. Aha, here we go. We've got Eric, who graduated in 2010, is doing product marketing at MongoDB. So no, it's not Google, but we'll go with that for a second. So now, if you want to go about getting in touch with Eric, because you check out his profile and you're like, whoa, this guy's not only a product marketer, he's basically risen up the ranks. You know, if I ever wanted to get a job at MongoDB, who better to reach out to than my future boss? But all that being said, if you want to reach out to Eric, how would you even get his attention, Sean? What would you do?
I'd probably like write a very concise email to him.
Okay.
I probably want to like talk a little bit about why I'm interested in product marketing, and then tie it into like you know, his past experience and like why I think he'd be a good person to answer any questions I had.
Yeah. And so just, I know this is going to sound crazy, but like literally write this email for me. I'll do all the
Okay.
transcription.
Okay, sure.
But I want your classmates to see this on the screen because otherwise it just seems so ethereal.
Okay, yeah, sure. Hi, Eric. You know, I know you're super busy, but you know, this email will only take, you know, 30 seconds to read. My name is Sean. I'm a student at Swarthmore, majoring in CS and sociology.
Okay, let me stop you right there. Why did you start with this sort of very apologetic opening?
I think it's just something that I've read online and has, I guess, worked for me in the past. Yeah, just because I think, I don't know, it's more respectful. That's at least my take on that. Yeah.
So here's the burden that Swaties carry, which is this feeling that we have to always humble ourselves whenever we do anything in the world, versus like your friends over at Harvard who just assume they're entitled to great opportunities. I wouldn't say go full Harvard, but I do think there's a certain something to, instead of leading with your weakest card and instead of leading with weakness, lead with strength. Mm-hmm. And what's in this case, what is the strongest commonality that ties you to Eric?
I'm a fellow Swarthmore student.
Exactly.
Or grad,
and honestly, that's why I read your email, if I recall correctly, because again, here I am 20 years out of school, not hearing from a single Swatie. And that was the magic opening where I was like, oh, fellow Swatie, I'm in already. I'm sure Eric will feel the same way. So I'm a current Swarthmore student. And where do you go from there?
Studying CS and sociology.
Okay. And maybe you've done a little research and maybe he studied that as well or something else, but yeah.
Sure. you know, I'm interested in product marketing because I've had past marketing experience um, at some companies I've had past marketing experience. Um, and
and why are you going down this road? Like, why are you kind of pitching yourself all of a sudden?
yeah, because I think like based on, like if I were Eric, I want to make sure that whoever I'm talking to has experience in like, you know, what they're interested in, because then I feel like it's less of a waste of my time, or like I feel like they'd be more informed.
There's that humility piece again. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
before I schedule a call.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so here's the reality. This is the advantage of being an old guy like myself, is when I was 20, I thought the exact same way as you did. Like who is already in the working world would ever want to talk to me? And yet you will feel this pull in 10 or 20 years where you will do whatever it takes to help another Swati because of this thing called generativity. It's kind of hard baked into the human species, which is we have this desire to pay it forward. We know how much we've been helped by our own elders, and we want a chance to have that legacy. And so I don't want to be pitched, I don't want to be sold to,
Mhm.
but I do want to be helpful. And so, how could you make me feel maybe less like I'm being sold to and more like you're someone who I'd be really excited to get to know, that wants to learn from me?
I guess make it more about you, or make it more about Eric.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So let's try that
Yeah.
again now.
Okay. So, Eric, I saw that you're currently you're currently the director of strategy and product marketing at MongoDB. And, I love to learn more about your work and how your path there from Swarthmore.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. And I love the fact that you use the word love, because I do find that the best way to get unblocked when you're starting to network for the first time is just come back to first principles, which always has to be about passion and curiosity. If you're doing it transactionally, if you're doing it just to check a box, it's not even that useful anyway. You're not going to get anywhere. But if you're genuinely curious, if you have a real passion, then lead with that. I'd love to learn more about your work, the things you love, even the things you hate, right? You're giving him a chance to tell his honest story, his true narrative. As someone who's potentially going to follow in your footsteps, I could learn so much from what you've discovered along the way. And where's the focus in this kind of message?
Entirely on Eric.
Entirely on Eric. And again, human nature, right? Who is everyone's single number one favorite topic of conversation?
Themselves.
Themselves, exactly. Got some psych majors on the line there. That's great. And so don't overthink it. Don't get into this like weird, like I've got to do this kabuki kind of thing with you. Instead, just be like, I genuinely want the answers to these questions because Jeremy freaked me out. He looked into my crystal ball. He told me how miserable I'm going to be in 2026. I want to avoid that fate by figuring out where I'm headed to. And then I know Swarthmore doesn't have any marketing classes, but you may have heard this already, having done some work. What does every great marketing campaign always include at the very end? A call to
action.
Call to action. And for those who don't know, a CTA is basically like a tagline or a next step. So again, I've had a lot of people from my graduate school alma mater reach out and say, Jeremy, you're so amazing, blah, blah, blah. Can you please connect with me? And I'm like, okay, accept. And that's the last thing I ever hear. They're kind of like waiting for me to do something. But instead, you've got to take the initiative. So you say, any chance you'd be free for even a 10-minute Zoom chat next week? And of course, as you'll learn as a marketer potentially, Sean, you're always trying to lower the friction, trying to say, hey, I don't want to make it really hard to say yes. I want to make it really easy to say yes. So I'm not asking for an hour. I'm not asking for tomorrow. I'm asking for next week, which is the week of infinite possibilities, and just a little old chat. And now, even if Eric's super busy, you've got your foot in the door and he's like, you know what? I'm going to give Sean a chance. But now I've got one more question for you, Sean, which is you are on the line with Eric next week and you have only 10 minutes of his time. What are you going to ask in those 10 minutes that could save you from that awful fate that I saw on the crystal ball?
I guess, like, what are some things that you wish you knew before getting into product marketing? Yeah.
And why are you going to ask that?
Because that's like the black swan. Like that's the unknown. For me, at least in my current position. Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, like the thing that Eric can do for you is not only doing the job, but he's also experienced what you're about to experience, which is what is it like to go from being a newbie to an insider? And then what regrets do I have? Where was I led astray by just reading blog posts? What do I wish I had known when I got my foot in the door? And if it turns out that he's like, you know what? Product marketing is like a lot of time in meetings and just more meetings and more meetings. And you're like, oh my God, I didn't go to Swarthmore to be in meetings for the rest of my life. Maybe you just saved yourselves 5 years of misery, right? And so
Definitely. Yeah.
obviously that's just one example, and you want to reach out to everyone on that list before, every single one of those PMMs, and hear their diverse experiences to build your portfolio. But that way, when you decide to go into PMM or consulting for that matter, you go in with eyes wide open. Still worth $100?
Yes. Always.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So Sean, you have totally rocked it in terms of demonstrating this. Does anyone out there have any questions about this process? Because like this is the thing that I did not do until 10 years after I graduated from Swarthmore, and I did it. I neglected it at my own peril. I can promise you that.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So let's say you finally meet him, talk about the path that he followed and what lesson he learned. What is the next step after that? How do you get further after that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because again, there were these two sort of networking goals I talked about: learning and earning, right? And again, you always want to start with learning. You never want to short circuit it and say, hey, let me just go out and get a job tomorrow, because you might be getting a job that's not the right one for you. But once you've done your homework, here's how planting these initial seeds can pay off at their earning stage. So let's say that in Sean's case, he's done his homework, product marketing is the perfect fit for him. He's empathetic, he loves to communicate, he loves to do analytics. And so he's like, this is going to be my sweet spot. Here's where I'm going to do the best work of my life. If he wanted to get a job at MongoDB, should he just apply online and leave it there? What do you think, Min?
Probably not.
Probably not. And it's actually, let me see if I can pull this up for you all. I don't know if you've ever seen this infographic, but it's from the applicant tracking system called JobVite. And basically what applicant tracking systems are, let me see if I can get a bigger version for you. Hold on one second. What applicant tracking systems are is if you've ever applied online, whether it's to Google or another tech company or anywhere, frankly, they're the system, the piece of software that captures your resume and basically puts you into a database for the recruiter to decide who's getting hired. And it's basically a black hole that most applicants never escape from. So if you've never heard back after applying, just know that JobVite is to blame. But the really nice thing about JobVite is they actually shared some of their internal data from hundreds of thousands of companies where they're the applicant tracking system. And what they showed is that when you look at the people who apply across North America, it turns out that the vast majority of applicants are applying either on career sites, so google.com, or on job boards, LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, places like that. Unfortunately for those people, and they may include you at this point, those applicants are not getting hired very often. They're a tiny minority of all the hires, even though they're a vast majority of all the applicants. On the other hand, there's this line up here called employee referral. And the nice thing about this line is that it's a real arbitrage opportunity for you as a clever job seeker, which is while everyone else is going out and applying the traditional way and getting nowhere, this tiny minority of all applicants is getting the vast plurality of all actual offers across our continent. And so if you're a smart job seeker, you're like, wait a second, why am I just applying to MongoDB into their applicant tracking system and getting nowhere when I could be referred in by someone, which gives me a 10x boost in my chances of being hired? And the way that you're going to get a referral, by the way, is the exact same process that we just talked about. Because imagine now that you're Eric and you're about to hire a product marketer on your team, or you know a friend at the company who's hiring a product marketer. And let's go back to you, Sean, for a second. Sean, what are you going to tell Eric when you're ready to apply for MongoDB?
I'll probably like shoot. Hi, Mom. I'm on a call. Sorry, my mom is
Sorry,
here.
Sean's mom.
Yeah. But yeah, Zoom problems.
Danger of the gap year. Yeah, totally get it.
Yeah. No, so I'll probably just shoot Eric an email and say, hey, Eric, you know, I really enjoyed our last conversation. You know, I've done X things after talking with you, you know, like probably following his advice. And now I'm applying to Mongo, and is there any way that I can improve my chance of getting an interview?
Yeah, I love it. And why did you sort of take those steps? Just walk people through your thought process.
Yeah, so because I already talked with Eric, I want to make sure that I draw upon that previous, I guess, touch point
Yeah,
in the next email. And then I want to show that I'm someone who, takes action on advice and doesn't just like in one ear, out the other, right?
yep.
No one wants to help
I
someone
love
like
that.
that. And then, I didn't ask like directly for a referral. I think I asked more in a roundabout way, like, how can I improve my chance of getting an interview? But I think anyone in his position would like to get the hint that I'm looking for a referral.
Yeah. And if you put yourself in Eric's shoes, do you think he would want to give you the referral? What are your chances of success?
Um, I think I think if I had a good conversation with him and we hit it off, I think there's a pretty good chance.
Yeah. And let me explain why. So, what a referral is basically an internal member of the team vouching for an external person who wants to be a member of the team, right? It's the ultimate form of social capital transfer because we trust the people we work with already a lot more than we trust a stranger. And you, as an applicant, are a stranger, which is why your chances of being hired for any given role are so low. But as soon as Eric says, I like Sean, I've gotten to know him, and I trust him, all of a sudden, all of that goodwill, all of that trust that he's built up immediately transfers to you, which is why your chances increase so dramatically, as you saw in the infographic. And just to make matters better, most tech companies actually provide a referral bonus. So if you're hired and Eric was the one to put your name in, he could get paid anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 just for throwing your name in the hat for 5 seconds of work. And that's again because referred candidates, based on the data, just tend to be better candidates. They're more likely to accept an offer, more likely to stay longer on the job, more likely to be effective employees. And so the company wants to incentivize it and they give out the bonus. It's a win-win. So bottom line, start with learning, find great people to learn from, and then when the moment is right, go to that next stage of earning and focus on how do I earn a referral, earn an interview, earn a job. Make sense?
Yes, definitely. This was really, really helpful, Jeremy. Thank you.
Cool. Sorry for turning it into like a LinkedIn ad, but this is the stuff
Yeah,
that I wish I had known a long time ago.
definitely. I think right now I kind of want to open up the floor to, anyone else who has questions. Although I do want to ask one more. Just
Yeah.
I guess we should ask what are some things you wish you knew about product marketing before getting into it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I was kind of channeling some of my disgruntlement with big tech product marketing when I did reference the thing around meetings. I don't think this is specific to product marketing so much as it is to any big company, probably even outside of tech, is that the more cross-functional an organization, and tech companies tend to be very matrixed, as they say. So essentially, as a product marketer, I work with other marketers, sure, but I also work with the product manager for my group and the engineers for my group and the data scientists for my group and the designers for my group. And so every time you work with a new person, that's another prospective meeting to go to every single week. And you can see that if you're on a team at Google, like the Maps team that I was on, that had 10,000 engineers just for one product, those meetings do tend to add up. So again, not so much about product marketing per se, but just that wariness of, yeah, companies can seem great at the biggest levels because of the perks and the brand name and the pay, but there are definitely some strings attached with all that good stuff.
For sure. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, like feel free to ask now.
By the way, like I'm totally happy to answer any of the stuff behind the scenes that you've always wanted to ask. Like I know you can't ask a recruiter, why wasn't I given an interview or why didn't I get the job? But if you want to ask me that kind of stuff, I'm happy to give you more intel on what's happening behind the curtain.
I have one question, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So I'm trying to work in ed tech. So I'm just wondering if the environment, how was the environment of working in ed tech compared to other big tech companies, and why? And do you think it's better in a way?
Yeah, good question. So again, I would come back to that audience piece because there's a real diversity of companies within ed tech. Some of them sell to school districts, which is a really hard market to break into because they tend to be very slow moving, very bureaucratic, kind of like higher education in some ways, but really good once you're in. So there's a reason why textbook publishers are still in business 20 years after the widespread adoption of the internet, just because once they had their foot in the door, they were kind of stuck there. And that means that if you were to work at a more traditional publisher in educational technology, you could expect maybe a little less innovation, but a little more stability. Whereas if you're trying to sell learning products to parents and families and kids, that's going to be more like working at Apple, where it's a really tough business because, yeah, anyone can buy from you easily, but everyone's trying to sell tutoring services. Everyone's trying to sell a hot new education app like Duolingo or something like that. And so it's really easy to lose your customers as well. And so maybe more fast paced, maybe more dynamic, maybe more competitive. So again, broad strokes to paint the whole industry, but it does give you a sense of the possibilities. I wish you good luck, Trent.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's a little bit ill-defined, but you kind of mentioned that there's kind of a traditional path and an insider path when it comes to the career path to becoming a PMM. Yeah. I guess I was just wondering, like, if you could expand a little bit more on the insider path. I mean, you have like a whole course on it, so I don't know if you have like a quick breakdown on like how people should go about doing that. Yeah, I kind of just want to learn more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, this applies more to like the non-technical business side of the house than it does to technical, but I'm sure there's something similar there as well. Which is basically that like the business side of any tech company is less scalable than the technical side, but some jobs scale more than others. So for example, there only needs to be one product marketer for every product at Khan Academy, which means that there are only like 2 or 3 product marketers total. And that means there's going to be just fewer opportunities to break in. That said, sales does not scale nearly as well as product marketing. And so we have, a whole team of folks to go out and do sales, including many who are right out of school, because the simple act of reaching out to a school district superintendent, engaging with them over email or LinkedIn, starting a conversation, doing a sales pitch, like that's something you can automate today. And so that just creates more opportunities. And the same is true, like I said, of customer success, where, if you've got customers and they have tons and tons of questions, unfortunately for a company, they can't just wish all those questions away. They actually have a human build the relationship, manage the relationship, respond to the questions. And that's where customer success becomes a really sort of high volume part of the organization. And so again, if you think about it in terms of, okay, we can hire a bunch of fairly senior, well-paid folks in product marketing or product management, but we need a whole army of folks for sales and customer service and customer success. That's where the opportunity exists for people coming in right out of school.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And just to be clear though, I don't think that it's ever impossible to break in right into the role that you want. As Sean alluded to, the biggest companies do have formal programs to groom new talent, whether you want to be in product management or product marketing. There are these APM or APMM programs that will make that possible. And if you want to work for like a cool startup as maybe their first product marketer, what do you think you should do based on what you just saw, Will? What's the path to getting your foot in the door?
Reach out to somebody at that startup to learn more about it.
Exactly. And this is where what Sean was talking about could come in handy. If you're just reaching out to learn, you don't want to be pitching yourself, right? Because that's off-putting. But if you're reaching out to actually get a job, that is the time you do want to pitch a little bit. And so, for example, when I was coming out of grad school and there was this hot ed tech startup that was hiring for someone with 5 years of product marketing experience and I had 0, I reached out to the founder and I was like, I looked at your website, and based on the fact that I'm a former teacher and I'm studying marketing, here are the ways I would immediately change your website to make it more appealing to educators and drive more sales immediately. And that led to a coffee chat where he actually offered me a job, even though I was totally unqualified. And I think the reality is that people hire the people they know and they like, coming back to social capital, right? So how do you start to build up that capital? Start building up the social piece, build the relationships, build up the connections, and the rest will follow. Other questions? And again, it can be really specific. Like, as you can see, I love diving into specifics as far as how would I build my LinkedIn profile, or how would I find the best jobs, or whatever it is. So if anyone's feeling stuck at all in terms of how do I go from SWAT to where I want to be next? Feel free to jump on as well.
Yeah, if you can like talk a little bit about how you built your LinkedIn profile, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you something in return if you don't mind, Trin. Do you mind if I put your profile on the screen just to illustrate a few points?
I haven't even made a profile.
Okay, good. Okay,
So-
even better. Okay, is there a brave volunteer who will help Trin out, who will volunteer their profile? I think Min just raised his hand. Min, is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so you'll learn from Min to get ready for your own, okay, Trin? Okay, so hold on again. I'm going to share my screen. And again, what I want you to focus on here is not just sort of, oh, I'm a job seeker and I'm stuck in this job seeker mindset. Instead, do that empathy piece that I've been talking about and imagine what it's like to be a recruiter. So Trin, excuse me, let me go back to Min because I want to do this in the context of Min's profile and Trin can understand. Min, what's a job that you might want to have after you graduate?
Something in the software engineering and or AI machine learning.
Okay, beautiful. So let's say you want to be a machine learning engineer. So imagine that I'm using LinkedIn as a recruiter. And recruiters, by the way, pay LinkedIn $10,000 per year per seat just to access all the data on LinkedIn. So they're doing these searches all the time. And I pull up the search results and check this out. Here are my top 3 results: Randall, Christopher, and Eder. And these are the lucky 3 because they're the ones that I'm going to reach out to and offer an interview on the spot. Now just think about that for a moment. You are already freaking out because you're like, I applied online, I never heard back, and yet Randall's about to get an interview offered to him without him doing anything. That's a pretty sweet deal, right? Now, how do you get your profile to where Randall's is? So do a little machine learning, a little pattern matching here, if you don't mind, Min. What is the common pattern across all 3 quote unquote winning profiles?
They have second connection to you, and their job title matches what you're looking for.
Oh man, you are a good machine learning engineer. Those are the exact 2 most important criteria for LinkedIn's algorithm. So like with all the AI, with all the fancy stuff happening behind the scenes of LinkedIn, number 1, it's the pattern matching of, do you have the most important keyword, which is always the job title, in your most important section, which is your headline, a little piece of text below your name. And the reason, by the way, it's the most important section is just like the page title for Google's crawler. This section happens to be limited to 160 characters versus about 4,000 characters for every other section on your LinkedIn profile. So therefore, it's a lot harder to gain. You can't just stuff it with a million keywords and hope for the best. Kind of like a page on Google where you're trying to have a million keywords stuffed into your page. Instead, at just 160 characters, your headline is the truest sense of who you are and what you can do. So that's where the algorithm looks first, and it does a simple pattern match. Do you have the keyword in that section? And then number 2, because a lot of people have that in their headlines, how do we break the tie? Well, all things being equal, just like LinkedIn, or just like Google, focuses on page connection density. So is your page linked to by all the most important pages that we already know? LinkedIn says, let's show the recruiter all the profiles of the people who are connected to the person doing the search. Because all things being equal, Jeremy would rather see people who are plugged into his network versus total strangers. So Min, you nailed it. Now, can we go to your profile? Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. And again, everyone send Min a little shout out in the chat or let him know that you appreciate his being our guinea pig here. Let's see here. Let me know. Is that you, Min? Okay, awesome. LinkedIn never lets me down. Okay, so based on what you just saw over on this screen, which is simulating how the recruiters do their searches, what would you immediately change about your own headline to start getting found?
I don't know, because if I'm putting software engineering, which I haven't done yet, would that be relevant? Because it seems I'm lying.
Yeah,
right?
So let me ask you this. Would you feel okay, and I totally get it, by the way, would you feel okay saying aspiring machine learning engineer or future machine learning engineer?
Yes.
So in that case, you get the best of both worlds because you're absolutely honest and ethical about where you are in your career. But the nice thing is LinkedIn's algorithm doesn't care. All it's looking for is the keyword, not the modifier. So you still get credit for having it in your most important section. And all of a sudden, you start to appear on these searches. So that's the first thing. Now, let me ask you another question, Min. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, you know what? I like Randall, I like Christopher, but I'm actually looking for someone who is maybe based in Miami. As you might have heard, that's the next Silicon Valley. So I want to make sure I find an awesome machine learning engineer there. Where do you want to be, Min, after you graduate?
I guess Miami it is.
Okay. Oh, do you actually want to be in Miami?
No. I am undecided. So,
Okay. Got it. Because if you had told me I want to be in the Bay Area, or if I want to be in Austin, or if I want to be in Tokyo, wherever, like what I would tell you is the next thing that every recruiter does is they take their initial list and they filter by location. And so if you had said, hey, I want to be in the Bay Area, even if you're literally sitting in the Philly area today, you will be filtered out, even if you're the world's greatest machine learning engineer, because this one is a binary search, right? Either you're in or you're out. And so the counterintuitive advice is don't just list where you're sitting, list where you're going. You know, like Wayne Gretzky said with his quote, let people know where the puck is headed, i.e. your career, not just where you happen to be today. And then one last thing is, this is a little subtle thing, but as I look through these profiles, there's one piece of data, so to speak, on the screen that's very important to me as the human recruiter, but that's not that important to the algorithm. What do you think that piece of data is? And anyone else can feel free to guess as well.
Photo?
Photo, yes. Oh, good. So again, this is sort of like the psychological or sociological side of LinkedIn. But when I worked there, every single recruiter swore to me, Jeremy, I promise you, I never look at photos. I'm only focused on data, on skills, nothing else matters. And then we did a little experiment. We looked at who was getting outreach on LinkedIn, again, interviews served on a silver platter, versus who was never hearing from recruiters. And sure enough, your chances of getting outreach increased by 14-fold just by having a photo versus folks who didn't have it. And what that tells you is A, recruiters are totally full of BS, and B, you've got to make sure that your photo is up there and that it's effective, because otherwise you're going to lose out on this filter that every recruiter is doing. And there are three things that I want to call out for you, Min. The first one is that even though you have this nice large photo over here, when you appear on the recruiter screen, it's like 25 or 50 by 50 pixels. So not a lot of real estate. And the reason that's important is we know that people like photos because they have faces. You know, there are studies of newborn babies where they spend more time gazing at human faces than food sources, which would give you a sense of where faces rank on the human totem pole. And so right now I'd want to maybe crop your photo a little tighter around the head and shoulders just to make sure that your face really fills the frame. So that's number one, Min. Number two, the reason we look at faces is because it has the most information of any of our body parts, right? It has the most gestures, the most emotion that's being conveyed. And at least in North American business culture, there tends to be this primacy placed on really collegial looking faces. So faces with genuine smiles, with charisma. And I have to say, you've got a great smile here, Min, because it's what sociologists might call a Duchenne smile, where there's this autonomic nervous system kicking in because there's a little wrinkling around the lips, dimpling in the cheeks, wrinkling around the eyes, stuff that you basically can't fake. And rightly or wrongly, my intuition is, hey, Min's a great guy. He's going to be a great member of our team. Everyone's going to love him. So I'm going to click on his face. And then third and finally, you always want to dress for the team that you're going to be a part of next. So Min, if you had to close your eyes and imagine, it's 2022, COVID is fingers crossed all over, some people are back in the office, what do you think they're wearing to work at your dream company?
I would imagine, I know like the norm for like software engineering is just like hoodie and comfortable clothing.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Yeah. And you probably don't want to go as far as a hoodie necessarily. You always want to dress like one little level above. And I think you've nailed that here with a business casual look. However, if you were wearing a full suit, like your classmate Henry over here, I might actually be concerned because I'm like, oh my goodness, Min seemed so good. His smile was so nice. His keywords were so great. But now he's going to seem like a total outsider. I'm going to bring him in for an interview. He's going to wear his suit and everyone's going to be like, what is this guy doing here? He's not one of us. And so you always want to think about the tribe that you want to be a part of and how you can demonstrate that you're an insider, not an outsider. And really, that's basically the art of all job searching across your career, is it's all about making the match, right? Can you convince all these gatekeepers that you're already one of them, that you belong there, and that it's easy for them to say yes? And I think if you do all of that, Min, you'll be well on your way.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Cool, cool. And obviously, there's lots more you can do in terms of your experience and recommendations. But I always say that these 3 things that I shared with you are the holy trinity of LinkedIn, because they're the things that matter most to the algorithm and also the human recruiter. And so even if you spend 5 seconds on LinkedIn, those are the ones that you want to nail. Does that help, Trin? Do you feel like you have at least enough to get started with?
Yeah, I have like one more question.
Yeah,
like how
go for it.
important is the cover photo?
Yeah. So cover photo is important when people land on your profile. As you can see from the search itself, they're not seeing it immediately. So it's a little bit less important in terms of the hierarchy. But here's one little tip I'll share with you all before I have to run, which is if you want to fill up the cover photo with something besides a generic background, you really want to figure out what's going to communicate my brand, what really is focused on who I am. And so if I were Min, I would come over to a site like pexels.com and I would say, hey, show me machine learning. And I would find something, maybe like code, maybe like a little bit of robotics or a little bit of engineering that basically emphasizes my positioning in the labor marketplace. If you want someone who lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps this stuff, that's me. And because we're such a visual species, you're going to see that right there when you first land on my profile. So it's a perfect welcome mat. Does that help, Trin?
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so y'all, I got to run.
Yes.
But I just want to give a huge shout out to Sean for organizing this session. I love the fact that you're taking charge, Sean, and making awesome things happen on campus. And I want to give you all a shout out. I know you've got a million papers to write and projects that are due, but I hope this hour has been a little worth your while. And we'd love to stay in touch with you all on LinkedIn, of course. So feel free to connect.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you guys next week. Jeremy, is it possible for you to stay for just 2 more minutes so that we can thank you?
Oh yeah, of course, no problem.
So sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. I know we went a little bit over. Sorry about that.
No, I love this stuff. This is great.
That was amazing, Jeremy. I mean, like, seriously, I think that might have been our best talk so far. That was like very, very, very helpful. Just really insightful. I think everything you said was just like, I don't know, hit on the key points and contributed a lot. I learned so much from this conversation, so I really appreciate your time. And I think, yeah, people were very, very, just learned a lot from this session. So thank you so much. I don't want to take any more of your time. So thanks a lot. And I hope you have a really great week. And yeah, just thank you very much.
Oh yeah, it's totally my pleasure. And just so you know, like, I'm always happy to help out with more stuff on LinkedIn or more stuff on like sort of getting your foot in the door in the tech world. Because again, this is the stuff that like I spent years wandering in the desert trying to figure it out on my own. And it's not rocket science, as you can see, but you do need someone to sort of guide you a little bit. So anything I can do to help the SWAT community, just let me know.
For sure, Jeremy. We'll definitely keep in touch. Yeah. Thank you again.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you guys are doing. I love it. All right. Good luck, guys.
We're trying our best. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Bye, Jeremy.